Hello everybody, welcome back to the 5th video in this course, and in this video we are going to talk about lights. Now before we get started with the lighting, I just want to add a few little things to our scene. What I'm going to start with is a base for our character to stand on. In line with our style for our character, I want this to be a very cartoony looking ground. I imagine that our girl Link is standing in Hyrule Field, and in this field she is about to attack one or two enemies. To do this, I make a very off green color for the ground, and I am going to add little tiny details to it. Because it's cartoon, there are a few things we can keep in mind. We don't need very sharp angles unless absolutely necessary, for example our sword. But for grass, bushes, trees, all types of vegetation, we can keep it very simple. Just like with all my colors, I try my best to keep every single color on a separate layer. This makes it much easier for me to change any individual color if I need it. Also, if I want to add texture to one specific color layer, I can simply clip them to that layer without having to worry about accidentally destroying or changing a different color that is on a different layer. I do tell myself I don't want to spend a lot of time on this ground. Simply because it is not the main part of our image. I just want something for our character to be able to stand on, so that she's not floating in the air. As I mentioned earlier, to make the grass lines, I'm going to make very curved, simple shapes. I want to avoid very sharp lines for two reasons. One, of course, the cartoon, but the other one because this is an extra detail. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. When drawing grass, keep in mind that strands of grass have different lengths and different sizes. To try and visualize this, I make sure that my grass strands are that similar way. Adding a new layer, I'm going to give my grass some color. However, I want it to be slightly different from our ground color, or the green ground color, to make sure that we can distinguish between the grass strands and the ground color. If you look in nature, you will notice that grass itself has many different shades of color. The colors don't have to be very different, as long as they are different enough for me to distinguish between what is my ground and what is my extra detail. As I am drawing this, I am also considering how I want to do my lighting, as a sort of pre-visualization of how I might add it. I imagine that it is a very sunny day, perhaps it is high noon, the sun is high up in the sky, and our girl character is wandering outside. Perhaps she has just rested. Maybe she has set up camp and is now being attacked by various enemies. This gives me a moment to consider how I imagine my character to be in that light. As we are almost finished adding color to our strains of grass, I am also considering how I should manage the soil on which our girl Link stands on. What kind of texture I could add, what kind of design choices I could make to better situate that ground. Perhaps it has been a little muddy, but has dried up. Let's have a look. Going to my dirt layer, I'm going to lock the transparency. This means that anything I color will be inside the selected area of my layer only. What I'm attempting is to add some variation to the ground so that it's not one uniform color. There are various tricks you could do. You could use texture brushes. For me, for now, I'm going to give it a solid color and use my blend brush to simply smudge everything out, just to break up that single color of the dirt layer. I'm going to duplicate my shadow layer. I'm going to call this ground shadow. As you can see here, it follows the shadow of the character, but I don't want this, of course. So what I'm going to do with a big brush is simply remove all of that layer mask, select my grass mask, and this is where I'm going to add my shadow, as if the Link character, or girl Link character, is standing more clearly on the edge. Don't forget to put your layer on multiply mode so that we can have a darker color overlaying on top of our ground. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, so I'm going to add a very simple shadow, only to indicate that there is some interaction between our character and the ground. As you can see from the shadow, the light source has a pretty sharp angle, so we don't have to worry about portraying the shadow of the hair, the head, the sword. That is simply outside of our view. With that done for now, and we might go back on it later, I'm going to add something that I can put behind our girl Link character. A simple background to perhaps portray part of the sky that we can see. I'm going to, for a moment, put my shadow folder on a normal mode so I can handpick the color. And let's see what happens if I make the sky color that exact color. Why do I do this? Well, most shadow copy the light from the sky. If you ever go outside on a sunny day and you walk in the forest or park, and if you see the shadow that touches the ground on a grassy area, for example, you might notice that the shadow is bluer than green, meaning to say that the shadow is copied from the color of the sky. In our art, we can use this as a very nice way to distinguish between the light source and the shadow. Using various colors, I'm going to break up that color to envision that the light and the atmosphere are working together to make this very mysterious, adventurous color. I do notice, however, that my circular shape has knocked the top. I don't want this. I want there to be more or less a fluent circular shape. Like I mentioned before, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, so I'm going to make it a little smaller. Simply make a new selection and add it to it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect at all. I simply want to make something more egg-shaped in that sense. Using the blend brush, I'm going to smudge the color into place. That way it can also be unified with the rest of the shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle in my eyes. I simply want something to push the character forward. With that done, let's start on our lighting. First, I want our main light source. And our main light source is going to be put in our light folder. This light folder, and I'll show you in a second, is going to be put on a color dodge mode, or you could also use an add glow mode in Clip Studio Paint, depending on what you feel more comfortable with. Then I simply adjust the color so that it's not that super bright, but that we can actually see the color of the light on our character. I make a selection of my main shadow, and I'm going to give a layer mask to my light folder. Now, if I draw in the light source of my main light, it will follow the selection, the inverted selection, of my shadow layer. I see that I've made a mistake. I've accidentally forgot to invert my selection. This means that I'll have to figure out what I did wrong and simply go back a few steps. Now, there are many ways to add lighting to your character. This is one way. Simply draw in the lighter parts of our character, the same way we drew in the shadow part of our character. And we just follow the areas where the light is coming from. You might see that this takes a lot of time, and this is not the way you should approach light. You see, light comes down from the sky, meaning that the top of the head receives much more light then the bottom of the feet. Keeping that in mind, we can look for areas in our drawing that are faced towards the light. For example, the face, the cheeks. Parts that are aimed towards the light will receive more light than parts that are turned away from that light source. Even though I'm adding some highlight to her glistening hair, I am not very interested yet in the bigger details of materials and textures. Using a blend brush, I simply smooth out those lines and add them into the character. As with everything, it is very important that you have a reference that you can use. What parts of the body portray reflection? What parts of the body don't? At this point, I do want to emphasize to give yourself a great amount of creative freedom. It is, after all, your character, so make sure you treat it as such. You decide, nobody else. This is your character. There are, of course, laws of art to consider, but it doesn't mean that you can't have fun. It doesn't mean that you cannot explore or discover or learn in that sense. Remember, of course, that the best way to learn is making mistakes. In the same way that we have a shadow layer for our ground, we should also consider adding a light layer. An indication that light is not only hitting our character, it is also hitting the ground. At this moment in our artwork, I am missing something. What I'm possibly forgetting to select or deselect or make a change to my mask layer. If this happens to you, where you were not sure where you were going wrong, have a moment to take a step back. Go through all your layers and have a moment to disconnect yourself from coloring, adding light, and simply find the selection. Keeping a calm mind in situations like this is much more effective than panicking. Having added some main light source, I'm going to add something called rim light. Rim light is a very strong light that can push our character forward into our scene. It is a clever trick that professional artists use to make their characters more interesting. Rim lights are often very, very bright. While adding rim light, one thing you should keep in mind: it will only hit the areas which are in shadow. What you should attempt is not only to follow the lines, but to follow the form. Rim light can help a great deal in adding more volume to our design. Another piece of advice I will give you when adding rim light: keep it a very bright light. Don't add any color to it. Why, you may ask? Simply because if you add a color to it, you will have to justify where that color is coming from. For example, if you have a neon lamp next to you, then you can justify why this rim light is purple or blue. If you have it red, then you should add perhaps an emergency light. This way you can tell the viewer this red light is unnatural, but this is why it's there. I would say, unless it's absolutely necessary, keep the rim light a very sharp, bright white. An example of how we can use rim light to add extra dimensions or extra volume to our character is, for example, the knee. Even though it's not on the outside of the body, it is facing towards that rim light. So we can use the rim light to give that extra volume to our form. So remember, a rim light is not only to give a line to our character, it is also to emphasize volume. A great deal to consider when making art is the refining process. You might have heard it once or twice told on various videos and various courses. What they really mean to say is look for smaller detail. We work from big to small. For example, the edge of the head, maybe the line on the nose, maybe here beneath the jaw there is an extra line to consider. Maybe there's an extra shadow line. This is what they call refinement. We go from bigger to smaller. We go from wide to more zoomed in. And then the more we zoom in, the more we can see what our bigger gestures have done and how we need to adjust them slightly to better represent our design. This is another great example of why patience is your best friend. If you don't have patience, you're going to rush it. And if you start rushing, you might not have the art piece you deserve to have. Just take your time. Think about where your light source is. Think about where your shadow is coming from. And never be afraid to go back and change. For example, here I'm adding a little more shadow to the leg, to the skirt, simply because the shadow is more effective there. And little by little, we go over our drawing to see what we did and what we need to change. Just have patience. The more patience you have, the more you will not only enjoy the process, but the more people will enjoy your final product. I hope you've made it this far in your artwork and are ready to give your own character that beautiful lighting. Stay tuned in the next video where we are going to use occlusion shadows to give that extra push to our character. I will see you in the next video.